on biochemistry. And so really all biochemistry is a really fancy word for looking at the non-living components that allow life to exist. And so what we're going to do in this first lecture is go ahead and go through a very basic overview or review for a lot of you on what chemical knowledge you need to have in biology. And so by the end of this first discussion, you need to be able to summarize what we've talked about in order to answer our essential question for the day, which is, how is matter composed? So the first thing that we're going to do is just a very basic chemistry review. So first of all, the atom is the most basic unit of matter. So just like we talked about, the cell is the most basic unit of life, the atom is the most basic unit of matter. So it's the smallest unit of an element then that can retain the properties of that element. And not that we're saying the atom is the smallest thing out there. It's not, because it itself is composed of subatomic particles. However, it's the smallest unit that matter begins to exist with its characteristic properties. So then the subatomic particles, there's many of them, but the only ones you need to be concerned with are the protons, neutrons, and electrons. So again, matter is anything that takes up space and has mass: rocks, metals, oils, gases, organisms. Any of those are all forms of matter. From matter then we have elements, which is a substance that cannot be broken down by other substances by chemical reactions. And we keep track of these elements on the periodic table of elements, which you may be familiar with. And in fact, there are 92 elements that occur in nature. Though there are more elements than that, the extra elements don't occur in nature. They occur in laboratory situations. So we'll only concern ourselves with the 92 natural elements. And finally then, if we take two or more elements and we combine them chemically into a fixed ratio, we've now created a compound. And compounds are really important as we start to move into this discussion of things that are important for life. So if we look at a chemical example of H2O, water, you will see that every molecule of water has 2 hydrogens for every 1 oxygen. And so another example that we could look at would be sodium chloride or table salt. And so for every molecule of table salt, there's 1 sodium to 1 chlorine. So of all of those 92 elements though, 20 to 25% are essential for survival and reproduction of living organisms. Of that 20 to 25%, 96% of all living things are made up of 5. And we remember those 5 essential elements as CHOMP, for carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. We also have trace elements, though, that are required by living organisms, but they're required in very, very small amounts. So again, we're looking at the atom itself into its subatomic particles, and the 3 that are most important are the protons, neutrons, and electrons. So in this case, protons and neutrons have about the same mass, and that's going to be 1 atomic mass unit. And both the protons and the neutrons are going to be found in the nucleus of the atom. Electrons then are the 3rd particle that you need to be familiar with. And electrons also have a mass, but it's 1/1840th the mass of a proton, and they're in constant motion. And so when we're talking about the mass of an atom, we rarely worry about the mass of the electrons because they almost have none. So then an element, remember, is a pure substance consisting of all the same types of atoms. Elements then are substances that cannot be broken into similar substances through chemical means. So what are some examples of different elements that we have? There's calcium, magnesium, iron, sodium, zinc, phosphorus, oxygen, a whole host of those. So what I would like you to do right now, just very quickly in your notes, I would like you to look at this graph and answer the question: are all elements important to life? And so the graph that you are looking at shows the percentage of living organisms on average and what they're made up. So now that we've taken a minute and we've written about the different elements and what's most important, I want you to very quickly pick one of the CHOMP elements, and I want you to quickly research why is it essential to life. So what major role does it play in the human body, etc. Once you have an answer, you are going to share it out with your table mate. Okay, so as part of our chemistry review, let's go ahead and go through the periodic table very quickly so that we remember what each of the key components are. So when we're looking at each of the boxes on the periodic table, here's a key so we remember exactly what we're looking at. Remember that the middle is the element symbol, the top is the atomic number, which represents the number of protons, and the bottom number is the atomic mass, which is the number of protons plus neutrons averaged over all isotopes. Then we have groups, which are elements in the same vertical column that are going to have the same number of valence electrons, and remember valence electrons are the outermost electrons on an atom. And then we also have periods, which is the horizontal row, and these are going to have the same number of electron shells. So, very quickly, turn to your table mate. What else do you remember about the periodic table? Okay, so now that we've talked about atoms and elements and compounds, and we've kind of looked at what makes them unique and special, how we can find them on the periodic table, all of those things. Now we're going to start working on the question of what holds these compounds together. So, elements want to be stable. And to achieve this, they're going to form chemical bonds with other elements because of this thing called the octet rule. Elements will gain, lose, or share electrons to complete their valence shell and become stable like the noble gases. And we call it the octet rule because generally we're looking for 8 electrons, but that's a little deeper than we need to worry about in biology. So chemical bonds then are going to be an attraction between two atoms that result from the sharing or transferring of those valence electrons. So all of the exciting stuff for atoms is going to occur with those outermost electrons. And so one of the things that comes into play as we start to look at chemical bonding is electronegativity. And remember that electronegativity is really just measuring an atom's ability to attract electrons to itself. So the more electronegative an element is, the better it is at pulling those valence electrons to be part of its shell more than other elements. So that brings us to our types of bonds that you need to be familiar with. We have ionic bonds, which is a chemical bond that is the attraction between two oppositely charged ions or between two atoms with very different electronegativities. So generally in an ionic compound, you have one that has a very low electronegativity that is attached through that positive-negative interaction to another element that has a very high electronegativity. And in fact, in ionic bonds, it's not a sharing of the outermost electrons, but the higher electronegative element actually steals the electron from the lower electronegative element. The second type of bond that you need to know is covalent bonding. And covalent bonds really are just sharing electrons between two atoms. And so these bonds, instead of one taking from the other, they share those to complete their octet. And finally, we have hydrogen bonds, which is going to become very important when we start to talk about the different properties of water and the bonds that hold DNA together. So hydrogen bonds are also electrostatic attractions between a hydrogen atom, which is covalently bonded to a more electronegative atom, and then that hydrogen in one molecule is attracted to the electronegative atom in another molecule of the same substance. And while this is a little confusing right now, we're going to go more deeply into it to understand it. So, covalent bonds. 2 or more atoms share electrons, usually 2 nonmetals. It forms molecules and compounds. So a single bond is 1 pair of shared electrons. A double bond is 2 pairs. And we can even get bonds that are triple bonds of covalent nature where 3 pairs of electrons are shared. And so down below you can see hydrogen is a single covalent for the H2. O2 is double bonded, 2 oxygens are double bonded, and N2 is 2 nitrogens are triple bonded together. So the thing with covalent bonds, though, is that we end up with nonpolar covalent and polar covalent. So nonpolar covalent is where the electrons are shared equally between 2 atoms. So O2 is an example of this. Those 2 electrons that are shared between the 2 oxygen atoms spend an equal amount of time around both oxygens, and so they stay nonpolar. Okay, that's different than polar covalent, where the electrons in fact are not shared equally. And a great example of this, as we will see and go more in depth in the next lecture, is water. But in this case, the electrons that are shared between the hydrogens and the oxygen are actually not shared equally. Because oxygen is more electronegative than hydrogen, those electrons spend more time around the oxygen atom, and so that gives the oxygen side of the molecule a slightly negative charge, and it gives the hydrogen side of the molecule a slightly positive charge. And that's what polar means, is that you have poles, a negative pole or end and a positive pole or end. So then, of course, we've already talked about ions, but let's look a little more deeply at this. And so ionic bonds are going to occur between oppositely charged atoms or ions. This is usually going to be between a metal and a nonmetal, because metal transfers electrons to the nonmetal. It forms ionic compounds, and salts are really what we're looking at in biology as far as this goes. So again, our example is sodium chloride, table salt, lithium fluoride. So there's a transfer of electrons from one atom to the other, and that's what forms the ions. Remember that the cation is the positively charged ion, and the anion is the negatively charged ion. So here's an example, a picture of what that actually looks like in regards to sodium chloride, but it all ends up looking similar patterns regardless of what ionic compounds you have. So remember, our hydrogen bonds are going to occur between a partially positive hydrogen atom of 1 polar covalent molecule to the electronegative atom in another polar covalent molecule. And this fancy word for this is intermolecular bonds, and that's going to form between molecules. So why does this happen? So when a hydrogen ion or atom, is bonded to an electronegative atom, usually oxygen, nitrogen, or fluorine, the electrons are not shared equally, so this creates the polar covalent bond. So because the hydrogen now has a partially positive charge, the other atom has a partially negative charge, and that positive-negative interaction then allows for the different molecules to be attracted to each other. And so the main bonds in water, for instance, are going to be the covalent bonds between the hydrogens and the oxygen in each molecule of water. But then between the molecules of water, you get the hydrogen being attracted to another molecule's oxygen and so forth. And so because water molecules move around a lot, hydrogen bonds are constantly breaking and reforming. And because of those hydrogen bonds, what ends up happening is that water is much more structured as a liquid, as we'll really delve into, than most liquids like it. Okay, so here's a picture of each of our types of bonds that we went through: ionic, covalent, and hydrogen. Please be sure that you have these in your notes, drawn as they are, and labeled for which bond is which. So before we meet again and discuss the hydrogen bonding and its importance to the structures and properties of water, take a minute, summarize your notes from today by answering all of the essential